I find it's hard to go from brand recognition of a podcast to actual conversion of listening. And have you seen or found any trends that really show a better direct relationship with that, with, where you're putting the message versus where they're coming in and becoming new subscribers?
Yeah, so the first answer to that, I'm going to just pinpoint how you started out, that it may be different for everyone. So at Produce Your Podcast, we work primarily with business owners. So we are working with the brands and the businesses who want to leverage their podcast to basically increase their bottom line for visibility, for leads, and for sales. So the why for that and the end game for that is going to have a different strategy than someone who is maybe doing a true crime or an entertainment focus or a narrative storytelling focused podcast. Those are definitely two different types of growth strategies. So we're going to be focusing on the one that's going to be really optimized for the businesses who want to grow their business through their podcast. And in doing that, there's two schools of thoughts. And one is make sure those foundational pieces, like you said, are all buttoned up and have the podcast integrated into them. So that's the newsletter, that's your social media, that's how you have it presented on your website, that's your call to action in the show itself. That's a huge thing that a lot of times people they overlook the call to action. I literally just did a podcast audit yesterday for a business owner who is very successful and has a very successful show. But the way they ended their show was, okay, thanks, bye. And then and one of their biggest objectives for doing the podcast audit was because they said that they weren't getting enough conversions from the podcast to their newsletter or from the podcast to their website. And that was just such a simple, okay, but because you're not asking people to continue the conversation with you after the show, like highly engaged host, super powerful guests, really great show, but zero call to action at the end. So you've got to go through almost like a checklist of these foundational pieces first. And then you also have to have your mindset around your metrics to be appropriate, because I think that what is going to be successful for a niche podcast or business focused podcast, those metrics are going to be different than what you're expecting to hear out of a celebrity podcast or a Joe Rogan podcast, or again, the true crime podcast. Those have a wider audience and achieve wider results, lots more downloads. But in business focused podcasts, you don't need thousands and hundreds of thousands of downloads. If you are using the right call to action and the right strategy, you can convert quality over quantity. So that mindset around your metrics is really important. And then let's look at the platforms like you were asking. I personally am a huge advocate for leveraging other podcasts to promote your podcast, because you are already reaching people who are consuming content that they like on podcasts. Easy peasy. And then two, they're already consuming content that's similar to the content that you're putting out. So it is the perfect place to introduce your podcast to this audience who's already listening to podcasts and listening to podcast content similar to yours. So it's a natural conversion to be like, oh, well, I'll definitely check out this show because I'm already meeting box 1, box 2, and now box 3.
Level up your podcast with advice from the pros at Produce Your Podcast. Subscribe and hit the bell icon to stay updated. If you enjoyed this video, give it a thumbs up and share it with your network. For more expert tips and services, visit produceyourpodcast.com.